In modern society, atheists are frequently linked with a denial of religious convictions and a shift towards a secular and empirical perspective. But the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche contested this form of atheism, saying that it maintains the ideals and values of Christianity despite its claimed rejection of them. In this video, we delve into Nietzsche's concept of the Antichrist, a moniker he coined for his own brand of atheism that takes issue with conventional atheism's continued commitment to Christian values, such as equality, and its ultimate goal of alleviating suffering. In this video, we will delve into Nietzsche's philosophy and how he challenged the traditional view of atheism and its connection to Christian values. During the Age of Enlightenment, reason was commonly used to discredit the existence of a God, rather than to prove that he existed. Rational atheists were of the opinion that abstract reasoning was the most effective method of challenging Christianity. Nietzsche viewed this rational intellect, commonly regarded as being independent of the body, as the last vestige of a Christian faith in an immortal soul. He argues that this rational intellect is indebted to Christian metaphysics and to Cartesian dualism. The intellect employed by rational atheists to discredit the existence of God is actually a byproduct of this same metaphysical true world, which prioritizes abstract thought over sensory experience and is rooted in Christian metaphysics and dualism. The rejection of the Christian God by atheism may seem a victory, but it has not entirely freed itself from the grasp of the metaphysical true world. Nietzsche argues that atheism continues to be influenced by these concepts. Therefore, the shadow of God remains, as long as this form of atheism persists. As Nietzsche states in The Gay Science, after Buddha was dead, his shadow was still shown for centuries in a cave, a tremendous, gruesome shadow. God is dead, but given the way of men, there may still be caves for thousands of years in which his shadow will be shown. And we still have to vanquish his shadow. Using rationality to disprove God means erecting an ideal that establishes itself self-evidently, like God, and that all men are equal in the face of such a truth. These truths are believed to originate in a purely rational world separate from the body. The consequence is, disproving God means remaining Christian. Unconditional honest atheism is therefore not the antithesis of that ideal, as it appears to be. It is rather only one of the latest phases of its evolution, one of its terminal forms and inner consequences. It is the awe-inspiring catastrophe of 2,000 years of training in truthfulness that finally forbids itself the lie involved in belief in God. Nietzsche suggests that even though atheists may reject the Christian notion of a God, they still resort to using remnants of Christian metaphysics and values in their opposition towards the faith. New Age atheists utilize a moral critique against God, positing that God and believers in God are bad, leading to the flawed conclusion that God therefore does not exist. As an illustration, Nietzsche highlights the notion of equality, which is commonly upheld by atheists. However, he asserts that this value is rooted in Christian teachings that all individuals are equal before God, and that the weak should be privileged. This concept of equality was unprecedented in ancient cultures, such as those of Greece and Rome, before the rise of Christianity. Contemporary atheists, who vehemently reject the existence of God, still cling to the pervasive influence of these Christian values. This can be seen in their continued emphasis on alleviating human suffering, which they view as a sacred obligation. Nietzsche perceives this as a remnant of the Christian ideals of kindness, charity, and selflessness, which are central to the religion's moral framework. For Nietzsche, Christianity was not just a belief in a deity, or a soul that transcends mortality, or the divine creation story. It was an entire moral system that elevated compassion to the highest order and considered truth to be the ultimate objective, even at the expense of all else. Despite their rejection of the divine, modern-day rational atheists still follow the moral codes established by the Christian worldview. Because of this adherence to Christian ideals, rational atheism is not the antithesis of Christianity as is believed. In Nietzsche's view, the issue of belief or disbelief encompasses more than just the conscious reasoning of the mind. The Russian novelist Dostoevsky knew this as well. In his book Demons, Dostoevsky highlights a character who chooses to remain with Christ rather than the truth. But haven't you told me that if someone proved to you mathematically that the truth excludes Jesus Christ, you prefer to stay with Jesus Christ than with the truth? Nietzsche saw belief as a holistic concept, encompassing not just the mind and spirit, but also the body. For him, the creation of gods was not a coincidence, but rather a result of the functioning of the human body. He believed that our mind and self are simply labels for certain aspects of the body, and that our conscious thoughts and actions are conditioned by our dominant instincts and drives. According to Nietzsche, the body holds a greater reason than our small reason, which we refer to as the mind or soul. In his view, our small reason is merely a tool serving the body's needs. Nietzsche's psychology downgrades rationality to a mere tool of the body with its great reason. Instead of putting all his faith in an intellect viewed as separate from the body, he believes instead in the body with its instincts and drives. As Nietzsche says in Beyond Good and Evil, instinct is the greatest form of intelligence discovered so far. Therefore, in Nietzsche's perspective, using reason to disprove God would mean ignoring the physiological conditions that led to the belief in God in the first place. This highlights his belief that proof has little to do with what one believes, particularly when it comes to one's values. What the mob once learned to believe without reasons, who could overthrow that with reasons? In a similar tone to the earlier quote from Dostoevsky's Demons, Nietzsche posits that the motivations behind belief in God lie not within our intellect or small reason, but rather in the deeper inherent biology of our bodies. The great reason of the human body is what ultimately drives our beliefs, rather than rational thought. In Nietzsche's eyes, the motivations behind belief in a deity are not rooted in the intellect, our small reason, but rather in the greater reason that is embodied in the human physique. From Nietzsche's perspective, disproving God would only amount to blaming Christians for having been the victims of their own ignorance, which would be a dangerous mistake. This would be similar to Socrates' error that bad people are only bad out of ignorance. If they were more wise, then they would be good. The argument of the atheists is that only from a lack of knowledge or reason does one remain Christian. A Christian who has got rid of the superstition of God would be worthy of our respect. And this is where Nietzsche's elitism comes into focus. For Nietzsche, the Christian is a lower kind of human being, not because of his superstition or lack of knowledge. Rather, it is a matter of his bodily constitution. It is not the lack of knowledge that is pitiful. What is pitiful is the man himself. Nobody is free to become Christian. Nobody is converted to Christianity. You have to be sick enough for it. According to Nietzsche, for atheism to mature into a standalone philosophy, rather than being dependent on Christian beliefs, it must break away from the moral codes established by Christianity. Atheists must shed the teachings and values that have been inherited from the Christian faith and establish their own set of values. Later in the video, we will explore how Nietzsche solved this problem and what alternatives he offered to Christian ideals. According to Nietzsche, his Antichrist wasn't just aimed at criticizing Christianity, but also to attack elements of Christianity that still lingered within traditional atheism. In the Antichrist, Nietzsche separated himself from traditional atheists and rejected the typical arguments against the Christian God. That we find no God, either in history or in nature or behind nature, is not what differentiates us, but that we experience what has been revered as God, not as godlike, but as miserable, as absurd, as harmful, not merely as an error, but as a crime against life. We deny God as God. If one were to prove this God of the Christians to us, we should be even less able to believe in him. In this passage, Nietzsche positions himself as the polar opposite of the Christian, who believes in God without any evidence. But he does something even more subtle in this passage. He takes it a step further by disregarding the significance of proving God's existence. He criticizes the belief that reason plays a major role in whether one believes in God or not. By doing so, Nietzsche calls out those who try to use reason to either prove or disprove God's existence, and distances himself from other atheists who base their beliefs on rational arguments. In fact, Nietzsche denies in Ecce Homo that his atheism is the result of any logical deduction. God, immortality of the soul, redemption, hereafter, all of them concepts to which I have never paid any attention or given any time, even as a child. Perhaps I was never childish enough for them? Atheism is not at all familiar to me as a result, still less as an event. It is self-evident to me from instinct. According to Nietzsche, the labels of godless, atheist, or immoralist are not adequate to capture his position. He encompasses all of these concepts and more, which is why the term Antichrist better represents his opposition to both Christianity and the remnants of Christianity in atheism. In his view, rational atheism is still too heavily influenced by Christian beliefs and its metaphysics of the true world. Unlike the biblical Antichrist, who masquerades as Christ, Nietzsche openly declares himself as the Antichrist, and even signed his book and some letters with this title. He once wrote in a letter, "I am the Antichrist." Do you want a new name for me? The language of the church has one. I am the Antichrist. Nietzsche was just as committed to combating Christian theology as he was to combating Christian atheism. The Christian ideal has distanced itself from superstition by infiltrating many scientific and political pursuits. This makes it much harder to identify. The theological substitutes for the dead God will then be buzzwords like progress, humanity, or equality. The God we presumed dead, he creeps around and just doesn't want to be recognized and to be called by his own name. Nietzsche's message is clear. Despite the death of the Christian God, the impact of Christian ideals remains prevalent. This can be seen in individuals who identify as atheists or scientists, and in various movements and cultural outlets such as New Age spirituality, socialism, collectivism, liberalism, and conservatism, as well as popular culture. The dangerous nature of the Christian ideal hides in its value feelings, in things that can do without a conceptual expression. One has to learn how to expose and extract the traditional ideal, even where people have gotten rid of the dogmatic form of Christianity. This is why Nietzsche said that psychology is the way to the fundamental problems. It's going to take astute psychologists to recognize these Christian sentiments behind their new masks. Nietzsche is concerned with fighting Christianity and what still remains Christian within scientific, philosophic, and political spheres. To break free from the grip of Christianity, one must reject its core ideals, such as equality, selflessness, and the idea of an ultimate good. The pursuit of any value or ideal today is driven by the idea that it is an ultimate good. For instance, the pursuit of truth is not for its own sake, but rather based on the assumption that truth is inherently good, a belief rooted in the Christian understanding of God as both good and truthful. In this sense, those who seek truth for its overriding value are still pious, and therefore fundamentally Christian. Their commitment to truth makes sense only as a holdover from the belief in a metaphysical world, from Plato's faith that truth is divine. While many may reject the concept of God in Christianity, they still embrace its moral principles and the human ideal represented by Christ. Despite denying the central metaphysical elements of Christianity, such as the existence of God the Father, an afterlife, immortality of the soul, and resurrection, they may still see Christ as the ultimate representation of humanity. Despite all their objections, their atheism clearly does not prevent them from revering Christ as a desirable, albeit earthly ideal. This is where Nietzsche's atheism is different. He goes beyond just denying the existence of God and challenges the very foundations of Christian morality. Friedrich Nietzsche is an unparalleled and radical atheist who not only denies God, but also attacks Christianity at its core by challenging its ethic that is supposedly based on love and compassion. The attacks made upon Christianity, hitherto, had been not only timid, but false. As long as you do not feel the morality of Christianity as a capital crime against life, his defenders have good game. The question of mere truth of Christianity, whether in regard to the existence of his God, or the history of its creation legend, not to speak of the Christian astronomy and natural science, is a very trivial matter, as long as the value question of Christian morality is not affected. Is the morale of Christianity good for something, or is it a desecration and disgrace in spite of all the sanctity of seduction? War on the Christian ideal, not only on the Christian God. It's worth noting that Nietzsche is not rejecting love and compassion. I have already explored Nietzsche's rejection of Christian morality in a separate video, so I'm not going to go into that here. You can go watch that video if you are interested. Part of Nietzsche's critique of traditional atheism was highlighting its failure in creating a new standard of humanity beyond the Christian ideal of Christ. The term Antichrist serves as Nietzsche's answer to this problem, representing a shift in focus from spiritual principles such as rationality to the physical body. To establish his counter-ideal to Christ, Nietzsche drew inspiration from ancient Greece and gave his Antichrist a Greek name. Nietzsche intentionally chose the prefix anti, which is of Greek origin to emphasize its Greek roots. I am, in Greek, and not only in Greek, the Antichrist. In searching for the perfect moniker for his Antichrist, Nietzsche found that the Greek god Dionysus was the most fitting. In Nietzsche's writings, the term Antichrist is synonymous with Dionysus. Nietzsche wrote about this in the introduction to his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, stating that he found no other name that was more appropriate for his Antichrist. It was against morality that my instinct turned with this questionable book long ago. It was an instinct that aligned itself with life, and that discovered for itself a fundamentally opposite doctrine and valuation of life, purely artistic and anti-Christian. What to call it? As a philologist and man of words, I baptize it, not without taking some liberty, for who could claim to know the rightful name of the Antichrist? In the name of a Greek god. I called it Dionysian. The right name of the Antichrist, his true name, is thus Dionysus. In a note from Nietzsche's notebooks, he says, "The Christian doctrine was the counter-doctrine turned against the Dionysian one." With his conceptual persona of Antichrist, Nietzsche intends to bring this Dionysian doctrine back to life. Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, fertility, and ritual madness, embodies the cyclic essence of life and death. Linked to the annual cycle of growth, decline, and rejuvenation, as well as the repeated cycles of birth, life, and death in the natural world, Dionysus was viewed as a symbol of unity with the forces of nature and the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The Bacchic mysteries, among other rituals associated with Dionysus, were believed to aid individuals in experiencing a sense of unity with these cycles. This aligns Dionysus with Nietzsche's philosophy of eternal recurrence. If you'd like to gain a deeper understanding of eternal recurrence, I suggest watching this video where I explore the topic in detail. Nietzsche viewed Dionysus as a symbol of a new and universal human body, as opposed to the Christian ideal represented by Christ. Despite criticizing reason, Nietzsche did not reject it completely because it can aid in fighting the Christian ideal, but it cannot defeat it alone. The defeat of the Christian ideal can only be achieved through the introduction of a new ideal of humanity, represented by a human body. Thus, the battle between Dionysus and Christ is essentially a fight between two ideas of the human body, where Dionysus embodies every potential form of human existence, while Christ embodies the negation of life. The fight between these two figures isn't just a fight between two bodies, it's also a fight between two different doctrines, the philosophy of eternal recurrence and the doctrine of the resurrection. Unlike the figure of Christ, who links humanity to a purely spiritual world, Dionysus links humanity profoundly to the earth. This world, a monster of energy, without beginning, without end, a sea of forces flowing and rushing together, eternally changing, eternally flooding back, with tremendous years of recurrence, with an ebb and a flood of its forms. This, my Dionysian world of the eternally self-creating, the eternally self-destroying, this mystery world of the twofold voluptuous delight. This world is the will to power and nothing besides, and you yourselves are also this will to power and nothing besides. Nietzsche made a distinction between Christ, the ideal of Christianity, and the historical Jesus. Jesus is a historical figure that lived a Buddhistic life, while Christ is a mythical creation of the early Christian community and is not a flesh and blood person. Nietzsche views Christ as an unrealistic and unnatural representation of a sickly and weak body. Nietzsche sees Christianity as a form of pathology due to its negative portrayal of the human body and human desires, particularly in the case of sexuality. Christians view sex as sinful, and instead of seeking to master their impulses, they aim to extirpate them. In Nietzsche's view, any doctrine that slanders the act of procreation is mortally hostile to life. This principle of hostility to life embodied in the figure of Christ is what Nietzsche sees himself as combating. What do I fight in Christianity? Always one single thing: its ideal of man, its demands on man, its yes and no in relation to man. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Antichrist exposes the conundrum of conventional atheism, which clings to Christian values and morals despite professing to reject them. He maintained that conventional atheism was lacking in its rejection of religion, and required the development of its own values and ethics, instead of being parasitic upon Christian ones. Nietzsche sought to furnish a more comprehensive form of atheism that not only denies Christian values, but also offers an alternative ideal of humanity. The Antichrist symbolizes this new ideal. The Antichrist was meant politically rather than theologically, and has little connection to the biblical Antichrist. Think of Nietzsche's Antichrist as a Greek hero rather than the biblical Satan. In conclusion, Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy offers a scathing critique of Christianity and its morals, branding it both unsound and deviant from the natural order. But as a counterbalance, Nietzsche turns to the mythological roots of ancient Greece and presents the figure of Dionysus as an alternative to the Christian ideal of Christ. Unlike the Christian depiction of humanity as evil or corrupted, Nietzsche's Dionysus embodies health, vitality, and universality. Dionysus links humanity to the earth rather than an unattainable spiritual beyond. Moreover, Nietzsche finds fault with traditional atheism's failure to provide a suitable counterpart to the Christian ideal of humanity embodied in the figure of Christ. By elevating the figure of Dionysus, Nietzsche provides a fresh, Greek-inspired ideal of humanity, rich in complexity and variation.